morning, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you today? I feel awesome because today is going to be a great day and it's going to be a great vlog, but it's also going to be kind of a sad day too. Today, we're going to go do some vlogging with Breck, and Breck is going to watch Ja while I'm on my trip. So I'm going to be leaving Ja down there, and it's going to be a pretty sad moment, but we have a great vlog ahead of us. This is one I've wanted to do for a while, and this is also one that I just kept putting off. And sometimes, like I've mentioned before, I find out later there's a good reason that my brain tells me to put something off, and this particular one, it involves this guy right here, Frank Zappa. We're gonna explore a moment out of Frank Zappa's life, and he actually talks about it in his autobiography. Actually, it's an autobiography, but when he made the deal for his autobiography, he really wanted to put his personal views on the world and everything out. So his publisher made a deal that he had to do half autobiography and half he could do that. So he basically always called this a book about myself. So he discusses this experience in the book, but recently somebody has found my channel, been watching my videos, and told me that she was involved in this situation with him and that his story is not exactly true, and she gave me some proof to prove it. So Daze with Jordan the Lion, we are heading out to Rancho Cucamonga. Begins now! Well, there's your buddy Ja, and first things first, we got to go out for a walk. Then unfortunately, he's due for his rabies shot, so we got to go find a doctor to give him his rabies shot, one of the local animal hospitals. So I actually won't be leaving tomorrow, I'll be leaving the next day, but we just figured since Breck was off today, and that'll give me a day to get all my affairs in order before I go. Still gonna be sad to see him go. Still gonna be sad to see the old Joster go for a week. Actually, it's over a week. It's a television graveyard. The bright side, though, is that Breck has a yard and has a sliding glass door that Ja can come and go as he pleases, and he'll have a buddy, a little turtle to play with. I'm no expert on power lines, but this one looks to be hanging a little bit low, doesn't it? I mean, no joke, I could actually almost reach up and grab it. Oh, actually I think we're okay, because part of it's tied around this tree, and then there's another one going over here tied around this tree. Well, since we're going to be doing a Frank Zappa vlog, I figured I might as well bring that piece of wood that Scott Michaels gave me from Frank Zappa's house up there in Laurel Canyon. Alright, well, it's that time. We're actually going to forego going to Ja getting his shot because he doesn't need his rabies shot, he actually needs his immunity shot. And they said that he has to do a whole physical exam in order to give him that shot. And the problem with that is that a lot of times when you fly, the airlines will require a physical exam that was done I can't remember if it was 10 days or 30 days within when you're gonna fly. So I think it's better that I just wait till I get back from my trip and then we'll take him and do it because of the holiday flying. I think it'll just be easier since he's gonna be flying on the plane going back to Ohio for Christmas. We'll just wait and do the shot when we get back. So we're actually gonna hop in the car and head over to Breck's house now. What a nightmare, look at all this road construction. Alright, we've made it to downtown, so we got about a half an hour, 40 minutes away still. Bummer. Are you excited to see Breck? You're excited to see Breck? Or Breck's house? Oh, Breck's ready for Christmas. He's definitely ready for Christmas. Wow. Christmas lights and everything. Alright, well, we're leaving Breck's house and we're on our way out to Rancho Cucamonga to do the vlog. Frank Zappa, Studio Z. Formerly Powell Recording. So in 1963, Frank Zappa actually graduated from high school and had enrolled into college for a short time and actually married a woman that he met there. At the age of 20 years old, he had gotten married and had moved to here, Rancho Cucamonga. And actually where I am standing in front of right over here used to be the old location of his Studio Z. Now let's take a look and I'll tell you the story. So this was originally called Powell Records or Powell Recording, and there was a guy who owned it, Paul Bluff, who basically went into the military and studied electronics with the full intention of when he got out he was gonna open this studio. Now at the time, recording studios were pretty much, the standard was mono, but Paul had taken over this place, set up a recording studio, and didn't have a mixer. So he actually bought an old makeup mirror, like an old vanity, took the mirror off, and right in the center, as Frank said, installed a mixer that was 5 tracks and looked like it had those big knobs like Boris Karloff knobs, he said. And this, so other than Les Paul doing, like, at the time 8-track recording, this was really the only other studio that was comparable doing 5 tracks recording, and Frank said that it was more of like a primitive way. So anyway, Paul ended up just basically not having the finances to keep this place up, and Frank had worked for him for like a year. And right around that time, Frank, when he was in high school, had actually done the soundtrack for one of his teachers. His teacher wrote movies, and if the movie got made or whatever, in some way, the guy needed someone to do the music, liked Frank when he was in high school, and told Frank, if I ever sell this, I'll pay you. Well, right around the time that Paul was having trouble with Powell Recording right here, Frank actually got that money. He got the money, not all of it, he said, but he got some of the money from his teacher for that movie finally being made, and he took some of the money, went and bought a guitar, and then took the rest of the money and bought into this studio. And what he said basically that meant was, he said basically I agreed to take over the lease and pay all of Paul's debts. So right at that time, Frank's marriage actually was ending. They just basically realized they didn't have much in common, and Frank moved over to living in this studio, Studio Z, which was his recording studio. And he said there was no kitchen, there was no shower, and there was no food. So he had an industrial sink that he would wash up in, and his old buddy from Lancaster, Motorhead, who would eventually become one of the Mothers of Invention's roadies and then eventually a band member, he actually needed a place to stay at that time too, so Frank let him move in here, and there was really, like, mainly it was just kind of like furniture they would find on the street, and they had no food or anything. So Motorhead would apparently go to the blood banks and would donate blood or whatever and come back with mashed potatoes and coffee and things like that. And at that time, Frank actually got a weekend gig playing music. He would play 2 nights a week, 2 nights a weekend, all the way back in Sun Valley. So it was like an 80-mile drive, which, if you don't know anything about Frank, after 1967, Frank Zappa never actually had a driver's license. He said that it was just too time-consuming standing in line at the DMV. He wasn't going to do it, so he just decided never to have a driver's license again. So Frank was living here, let Motorhead live here, and had gotten that gig, so he was making $7 a night, a total of $14, and he said at that time they would take that $14 and he would go buy peanut butter, buy a little bit of bread, buy some cigarettes, and he said on a rare occurrence when they felt like splurging, they would buy an entire block of Velveeta cheese. So Frank set up shop here, and I actually found some pictures where there was a sign out front that said $13.50 an hour for recording, and Frank started making just a little bit of money and went to Hollywood because he actually had a girl that he liked named Lorraine. She would be known in the Freak Out record as Pete, but her name was Lorraine, and Lorraine needed a place for her friend who had a baby to stay, apparently. Now, Frank went up to this auction at an old movie studio house in Hollywood and spent $50 and bought a bunch of old props and old sceneries and backdrops, and actually got one of those cycling Cinerama scopes, so that on one side it was purple so that you could make it dark, and one side it was light. You know how I mentioned back in the Max Sennett filming era, he would have that and it would just run on a loop, because Frank eventually wanted to make movies here as well as doing the recordings. And so he went and he bought all those sets, Got them for 50 bucks, and he said he actually bought so much for 50 bucks he couldn't even fit it all in here. But he repainted all the sets and everything and had a TV studio sign right out front. So the inside of this place had all those sets, and he said right back by the bathroom where he slept, he had painted like a rocket ship. The bathroom door was a jukebox, and there were just various different things all over this place. And so when Lorraine back in Hollywood needed a place to stay, he actually told her and her friend that they could come out here and they could stay out here. And that ends up becoming a little bit of a problem, because right across the street at the time, before this shopping plaza and all of this stuff over here was here, it was actually what Frank described as a holy roller church. And he said that, as I mentioned, the friend of Lorraine's had a black baby, and so the baby, Lorraine, and the mother would all kind of roller skate out in front on the sidewalk and everything, and it would really upset the holy rollers. And so Frank said this ends up becoming a real problem because he ends up getting set up when he tries to make a movie. Now let's go a little bit closer and take a look. So like I said, Frank had bought all these movie sets and he was actually wanting to make a movie. He had an 8mm camcorder, but he didn't have the money, so he actually did an interview with the local, I think it was the Ontario newspaper, and basically went into detail about what he was going to make this movie about. And the movie was called Captain Beefheart versus the Grunt Man. And of course, if you've seen my vlogs, you know that Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa had a really bizarre friendship throughout their life. Frank wants to make this movie, so he does this interview and mentions that he's casting for this. So when he holds the casting, an undercover Vice Squad agent comes and auditions. He doesn't get the part, but Frank says a few weeks later he would come back in a disguise as a used car salesman and try and trap Frank and ask him to make a stag video for an upcoming event, like a bachelor party. And Frank said, well, making a movie like that costs a lot of money. I can't afford to do that, but for $100 I could make an audio recording. And so the guy says, okay. So Frank overnight makes an audio recording with Lorraine here. Although in his book he says it was just a friend. I've since been in contact with Lorraine, and she said that they were actually dating pretty hot and heavy. They were in love at that time. It's just that Frank's wife, Gail, who she would become friends with later, just didn't want Lorraine's name to get any kind of notoriety, and so she was either never named in the book or just known as Pete. So the story then goes this is what ends up happening to Studio Z. So Frank has agreed to make this audio recording of these sexual sounds. What he ends up doing is he and Lorraine spend about a half an hour making these goofy sounds, not actually having sex, but they were making all the sounds. Frank says he spent all night editing out the giggles and laughs and everything, and then the next day, the quote-unquote used car salesman, the Detective Willits, we will end up knowing him as, shows up with only $50 of the 100. Frank says no, the deal was for 100. Never gives the guy the tape, and says that all of a sudden the doors get kicked in and there are TV crews and reporters and everybody there, and they're making a big deal, and he's now being accused of conspiracy to commit pornography. Now he says that the issue with that is that he says his dad had been having some health problems right then and couldn't afford to help hire a lawyer originally, and then he ends up coming up with the money and then does hire a lawyer for Frank. But he says that they end up both getting arrested for this, and he said the problem is that the pornography charge is actually just a misdemeanor, but the conspiracy, and he said that goes all the way down to the way California views conspiracies. He said, if you talk about jaywalking, that's a conspiracy. So the fact that we had talked about making this recording, they were going to charge us federally, which could get me 10 years in jail. Now, right here was where the old studio was, and they end up going to court, and Frank actually had made some recordings for Art LeBeau, and went to Art LeBeau and got an advance on his royalties so that he could bail Lorraine out of jail. So Frank ends up bailing her out of jail, and she says that the entire time she was in jail, they would interview her daily, and they found out later that they were actually recording all of her conversations with them just to see if there was any way that they could prove that there was conspiracy to commit pornography here. And he says the reason was it was a political thing. He said for one thing, he found out that the city was wanting to take over his property and bulldoze it because they wanted to expand this street by 15 feet. And he said the church also particularly didn't like the fact that Frank was considered an outsider. Frank said he was considered, they wrote about him in the paper and said he was a long hair, but he said his hair wasn't long, and he said they considered him like a bohemian, but he said that's because everybody in this town at that time dressed like Pee Wee Herman, like they had a short sleeve button-up shirt with a bow tie, and he said I wore t-shirts, and if you wore t-shirts you were considered avant-garde. So he was already considered an outsider, and then he had, you know, a handful of people coming and going and living in this studio, and then, you know, a white woman with a black child roller skating up and down this sidewalk. How horrible, you know, obviously. And he said that they were basically trying to take over his studio. So he said what ends up happening is he basically is forced to cut a plea deal where it's like a 6-month sentence, but it's all suspended except for 10 days. So he ends up going to jail for 10 days, and then he said when he came out, they had boarded up and chained up and everything his studio, which was right here. It was actually 8040. He said that they had boarded up his studio and everything, and he said I got bolt cutters, came and cut it open, got all of my equipment out. He said they had actually confiscated all of his recording, all of his tapes, and his movie, his 8mm also, and he said they told him if he would, you know, either let them listen to all the tapes or whatever, they would erase the ones that they couldn't, or they would erase them and give them back, but he said he never got any of the recordings back. And then I found an interview with Lorraine where she actually mentions that later on in life Frank would you know, cut a similar recording for Freakout, and then would end up later on sending a copy of this and sign it to Detective Willits, the man who had tried to get him locked away. And he said one of the funny things is that his dad had actually hired Barry Goldwater's attorney to represent Frank, and when the attorney came in and said, how do you not know who Detective Willits is? This is the guy who goes and hangs out in bathrooms to catch like homosexual activity. And Frank said, well, because I don't hang out in bathrooms, and I don't expect people that come in to audition for a movie for me or to come in to record something to totally be a slime ball. Now Frank actually said that it was those days in jail that he spent that were just so horrible that he actually realized how broken the penal system was, and would be pretty outspoken about that his whole life. And he said throughout his life he never saw anything about it change, and never thought that the situations and the what people were enduring in there was any kind of rehabilitation. He thought it only made them worse. He said he couldn't even eat the food in there, but there were people in there that would eat anything off the floor. It was just almost inhumane. Now we'll take a walk around the back and around the side so you can see how deep the property would have been, but Frank said at the time this town was super small. In fact, he said it was like there were just a few businesses up and down this street, and then there was like the church and the recording studio here, and then he said just a few more things down there, including a school, and he said other than that, that was pretty much all there was out here. So here's how deep the property goes, and like I said, from what I was able to find out online, it looks like they did actually do exactly as he said. They did expand the street by 15 feet, so the original property would have actually been much further out here, pretty much all the way into the first lane of traffic. Now what's funny is Lorraine would also say that during the time that she dated Frank, you know, like I mentioned, and I don't know why this is, I don't know enough about Frank's wife pretty much for his life, Gail, but I never hear anything positive about Gail. Even Lorraine, when she would tell me things, she never said anything negative about Gail. She would just kind of allude to a possessiveness to where, you know, even though Lorraine would tell me that she would consider Frank the love of her life, she said that even for the year that she lived up there at Laurel Canyon with Gail and all of them. She said she actually was living there during the Manson killings, and said that Gail had wanted to hire a private guard and everything to watch after them, and Frank was like, yeah, absolutely, hire a guard. And said during that time she lived up there, even though she would consider Frank to be like the love of her life, she never had any kind of relationship with him during that time that that she lived there. And she said that her mother never liked Frank. Even from the first time she met him, never liked him and always referred to him as the chimney sweep. And so she said later on, when Frank would become, and this is actually the back of where Studio Z was, she said that when Frank would become famous and lived up there at the house on Laurel Canyon, she went to the house one day and said, Frank, my mother and sister would like to meet you. And Frank said, okay, and went up to his fireplace and grabbed like a fire poker or like the broom or whatever, and came out and said, oh, good timing, I just got done cleaning the chimney. Now, Frank actually said in his book that they were so intent on finding him guilty of this when they went for the setup that he said he found out that they had actually drilled holes in the walls of his studio and had been eavesdropping and recording anything that was going on for days leading up to that. He said that they had also had people like stationed out in the van across the street kind of scenario, and said that the Detective Willits, the Vice Squad guy who was setting him up, actually had a microphone, no joke, in his watch that they were recording the whole conversation. So once Frank comes out of jail, gets his equipment back, he ends up packing up and moving to Hollywood. And I'll vlog that place sometime. He ends up moving to Echo Park and working at Wallach's Music City, if you remember when I did that vlog. They're stopping any time? Well, it's not by choice. If the traffic could free up, we would not be stopped. Well, the little stand that comes with my microphone that holds it in place actually broke, so I need to go in here and get another one. That's why the audio might sound a little weird today, guys. Alright, we found one. And yes, we are on Route 66, as you can see right there. Well, we're back with Jaw. Did you miss us, buddy? We're gonna go out for a walk now. Nice. Oh, that looks good. These are wooden. Those look pretty good. What do you think, Jaw? You think they look good? Oh wow, what a view. Look at that. Well, the sun's went down, Breck's got his Christmas lights on, it looks pretty good. Now, most of you that saw my videos last year, you know that Breck goes way all out, so there'll probably be more added to this, who knows, but looks pretty good right now. Kind of a cool Mickey on a rocking horse here. Then you can kind of see it in here. There's actual snow that's moving around there, the snow globe. I think it looks pretty dang good. Well, good night, my friends. I'm about to leave Breck's place, and I gotta say goodbye to this guy. I'm totally gonna miss you, buddy. He's been acting weird for the last couple hours, so he definitely knows what's happening. He knows, and he's not cool with it, but I'll be back before he knows it. He's gonna have a lot of park time and a lot of fun here, and I know everybody will miss him. But if you're on the Facebook page, Breck will be doing little videos of Jaw and putting them up on there, so you'll still get to see Jaw. So say goodbye to our little buddy, everybody. I'm gonna miss you, Joster. Bye, bud. And goodbye, Lionhearts. Have a good night.